unfortunately, when we frame issues sometimes, we create false dichotomies. So for some, it's disproportionality, this issue of over or underrepresentation of minority children under age 18 compared to their representation in the general population. Pretty much the same definition that Dr. Lang has shared with you. And others would say, no, it's about disparities. It's about that unequal treatment, those differences in outcomes and results. And I have to say to you that from our perspective, it's about both. And one way that I think about this that I hope might be useful for you is think about a child who has a body temperature of 104.5. That's pretty high, isn't it? Normal body temperature is what, 98.6. So I'm equating the overrepresentation with the high body temperature. Clearly, something's wrong. Something's not right. Something's causing that baby or that young child or that young adult to have a temperature that's above what we consider safe and normal. But it does not tell you what's causing it. So the disparities, looking at the data, looking at the mean interpretation behind the data, trying to figure out what's causing that is what the work is about. And so if we only look at the child's body temperature and we say, well, we don't really need to know what's causing, we just need to get the child's body temperature down and then everything will be okay. How many of you think that would be a responsible approach? Okay, I didn't think so. And so when you look at the disparities as a result of noticing the overrepresentation, you begin to ask yourselves, okay, at what decision point and why are certain kids overrepresented and others underrepresented? And I think it's really important to emphasize both the over and the under representation. And one of the ways that I've tried to emphasize that is just referring to a study that was done back in 1999 out of Denver with 173 kids who had been victims of abusive head trauma. And that's one of those childhood illnesses that is easily misdiagnosed. And they found that doctors were twice as likely to misdiagnose abusive head trauma when the child was white as opposed to when the child was black. Which meant that, and the two general causations are either an accident or maltreatment. And then there are a lot of pieces up under that. Well, the white kids were being misdiagnosed twice as high, basically saying that these kids were victims of accidents. And the African American kids or the black kids were being misdiagnosed, suggesting and reporting that these kids were victims of maltreatment. And so what we learned from that, what we draw from that is that you had some white children who were being sent back home when they should have been kept out of the home, or certainly the recipient of some intervention that would protect them from maltreatment. And you had some black kids who were being removed from the home under the assumption that they were being maltreated when they really should have stayed home and gotten good medical care or been able to stay in the hospital. My point is that the bias is hurting both black and white children. And so when we asked ourselves the questions about underrepresentation of certain groups, is that because those kids are not being maltreated, or is it because we're taking a different approach to their situation? What are the facts? What are the assumptions? What are our beliefs? And what, if any, are our stereotypes? And so the other point to be made here is that back to the child with the high body temperature, you don't want to just get the body temperature down and say, oh boy, I'm such a great person, I got that child's body temperature down. And it's about safely getting that temperature down. It's about paying attention to what's contributing to that and addressing those at the appropriate times and in the appropriate ways. And it's the same with this work. We're not suggesting, and we actually advocate against the notion of just lowering the rates of overrepresentation as though it's a numbers game. This is not a numbers game. And during times when we've experiencing severe budget constraints, it's even more of a dangerous approach. I would submit to you that until we come up with something else, we need a child welfare system. Some of my colleagues don't agree with me about that, and I respect that. But in the absence of having something that's better, we need that. There are children who are maltreated. But the question for us is, are we removing the right children? And so, you know, children from certain families of color are more likely to be referred to the child welfare system at the national level, and you've seen it in Toni's data. And some are removed unnecessarily from their homes. So we have kids in foster care. Are they the right ones? You know, 60% of the kids, last time we checked, come into the foster care system because of neglect, not for abuse. And so clearly there are some very heinous forms, some very tragic ways in which kids can be neglected. But again, are we removing the right ones? And are poor kids the only ones who are maltreated? So what happens, does anybody here think that middle class and upper class kids are not maltreated? Raise your hands. Okay, so where do they go? What do they get? And why can't poor kids and poor families get some of that? What are the facts, the assumptions, and beliefs and stereotypes that suggest that poor kids should come into foster care, but middle class and upper class kids get something different?